Hi, everybody. Welcome to another research update with Leslyn. I'm Leslyn Keith. I'm the president of the board and director of research for the Lipedema project. And I like to get together with you twice a month, hopefully, to go over any new papers, research projects, anything that's out there of relevance to lipedema. And so I have a really good one for today. But before I get into it, just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions or comments, if you're here live, be sure and post them. And I love it when you tell me where you are in the world and how you're doing. Go ahead and post something there. If you have any comments about the paper I go over, post it. We will be putting a link to this paper. So if you want to read the whole thing yourself, I highly recommend it. So the paper that I'm going to talk about today is called The Role of Physical Exercise as a Therapeutic Tool to Improve Lipedema, a consensus statement from the Italian Society of Motor and Sports Sciences and the Italian Society of Phlebology. So this is really cool. This is two major organizations in Italy that got together to make a consensus statement just on using exercise for lipedema. So it's a very interesting paper. I think they did a fabulous job. It was just came out in July of 2024 in Current Obesity Reports. So it's a very interesting paper. What the aim of this paper was that they wanted to do first a comprehensive overview of lipedema. And they didn't do totally comprehensive, but they did put some neat things in the paper. And then they wanted to describe what were the distinguishing features of lipedema and how specifically it was different from obesity. And then they wanted to then get into the details of the role that exercise can play in managing symptoms of lipedema. And also, could an optimal exercise program be identified for lipedema? So let's get into what they found as they were looking through all the literature and putting together this consensus statement. So the first thing is that they looked at BMI or body mass index versus waist to height ratio, two different ways of assessing someone. And what they said is that lipedema differs from obesity in several ways, and BMI does not reflect those differences. So it doesn't help differentiate between lipedema and obesity because lipedema, unlike obesity, affects mostly women. You can have a normal body weight, but still be disproportionate between your upper and lower bodies. And typical weight loss strategies don't affect the lower body for people with lipedema. And none of this is reflected when you're assessing someone with just BMI. So BMI it's based on height and weight, but it doesn't say anything about what is going on with the fat tissue and where on the body is it. And then it also says that they say it's very important. We need to be assessing the body composition. You know, how much body fat do you have? How much fluid? How much muscle tissue? And also be looking at the general metabolic health. So a lot of limitations with just using BMI. But on waist to height ratio, on the other hand, some good benefits of using that. It's a assessment of a person that's totally independent of what their weight is. And it could end up giving you some more information about the nutritional condition or the assessment of their metabolic health by this measure. And it can be used to rule out obesity in a lipedema patient. So if a person has lipedema but no obesity, they're going to have a narrow waist. And so then that waist to height ratio will be different. But if they also have obesity and lipedema, then that would be captured with this. And so really what they're recommending is we should use both because we're getting different information between the two. And when we use them both, we can have a normal waist to height ratio, but an increased BMI, which means that we probably have a disproportion. So if the BMI is high, but we have a normal waist to height ratio, that means that all the weight is in the lower body. And then in an elevated waist to height ratio with elevated BMI, would say that there's obesity present, but it doesn't say that they don't have lipedema. So further testing to assess that. So for this reason, neither BMI or waist to height ratio is going to be diagnostic for lipedema. So it just simply is going to give us more information. So they do recommend using both, but definitely not just using just BMI. Then they talked about tissue differences between the fat tissue in lipedema versus the fat tissue in someone who does not have lipedema. And so some distinct tissue differences that they noticed in literature. One is increased adipocyte or fat cell size, increased number of macrophages and crown-like structures, so that the material in the fat tissue was different for someone with lipedema. And then the number and the size of blood and lymph vessels was different. And also the presence of fibrosis is in that, the lipedema fat tissue. Then they looked at a metabolomic profile in lipedema. So that is when you go to have your blood drawn and you get all those lab values. So there was a recent study that came out in 2023, and they looked at 39 different metabolites, and of those, 9 showed distinct differences between lipedema numbers or a profile and someone without lipedema. Specifically, they were actually comparing people with lipedema versus women who had lipedema or had obesity but no lipedema. So they were looking at what can be difference between obesity and lipedema. 9 things were significantly different. And so with further study, maybe some of these 9 could be used as a biomarker for lipedema. More research needed there. But these different 9 biomarkers were involved in hormonal synthesis, in energy production, and neurotransmitter regulation. So if we know more about this, maybe some targeted supplementation or other treatments could be used if those things are elevated in a particular patient. So this could be a treatment intervention once we know some more. And then they looked at genes, and specifically they were looking at the IL-6 gene. There was a nice study in 2020 that was published, and they found that there was this variation of this gene was more prevalent in lipedema tissue. And matter of fact, on average, it was almost 6 times more prevalent in lipedema tissue than non-lipedema tissue. So that was very, very interesting. And so it might be diagnostic in the future for a certain type of lipedema, because not all people with lipedema would necessarily have this gene mutation, but it's something that could be helpful. So they were really looking at that specifically. And then they started looking at hormones. We know that there seems to be, and someone, Linda, sorry, you asked me what the 9 biomarkers are. Have to get that paper, which I did review previously, and we did review that. Email me, Linda, and I can get you that and those different biomarkers. Again, they're not sold as a biomarker for lipedema, but they are promising, and we should do further research because they may have potential to be a biomarker. So estrogen and different hormones with lipedema. First, estrogen, it influences how body fat is distributed on our body. It is involved in mitochondrial function, which is energy production, and also involved in inflammation. So you can see how all 3 of these things that estrogen is involved in can be very involved in lipedema and symptoms of lipedema. And so what we're seeing is changes not only in estrogen activity, but estrogen receptor activity, meaning those places on a cell that can receive estrogen and allow it to enter the cell. And so you have more often a lack of those available estrogen receptors that seem to have an impact. And it seems to have an impact on fat accumulation, especially in the lower body. So they also looked at growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor and how this is involved in stimulating fat breakdown, and also in fat cell differentiation. And they found higher levels of IGF-1 or insulin growth factor 1 in patients with lipedema. And this was found, they did Petri dish studies, and they used the aspirate from liposuction. And so they were looking at that lipedema fat that had been withdrawn during liposuction surgeries. And they were looking at that, and they found those higher levels of the IGF-1 could be causing the adipocyte cells to differentiate in a certain way that wasn't healthy. And so this could be implicated. Again, they're saying more study in that area is needed. And then lastly, they looked at the thyroid hormone. We know that people who have obesity more typically have low thyroid, and just about 30 to 40% of patients with lipedema also tend to be low thyroid. So this is, and also they say here autoimmune thyroiditis also. It seems to be higher prevalence in lipedema than in general population. So these are the hormones that are generally talked about in the literature and that they were interested in. And then, so then they finally got on to exercise. So that was their kind of their overview of lipedema and what's been said. And now specifically, what about exercise? And so they were talking about the many benefits that exercise can have on particular symptoms of lipedema. And one was an improved regulation of inflammation. We know that there's a lot of inflammation typically with lipedema, and that's what gives rise to the pain. And so there's two types of macrophages, and one is considered the bad macrophage, and the other is more of the good macrophage. Just loosely called that. I don't know that they actually are good and evil, but you want to have more of the M2 macrophages, and that seems to be when we have exercise. When we exercise, we have elevated levels of the M2 macrophage, which would mean we have decreased inflammation. And with exercise, it increased blood flow and then increased oxygenation to all the cells in the body. And there is an issue with hypoxia or low oxygen in lipedema cells. And so maybe this would help with that. And then exercise also improves how you metabolize your fat and how fat is stored, and also can promote what's called the browning of white adipose tissue. So white adipose tissue is pretty much inert. It's more of a storage type fat, but brown adipose tissue is an energy. It wants to be burned up and it can be used for energy. And so exercise can help turn that white fat into brown fat, which is going to be much more metabolically active. And exercise is going to reduce fatigue and weakness in the muscles, symptoms of lipedema. Using that calf muscle pump can help with increasing the lymphatic drainage and venous flow, getting things up from the lower legs and up to the trunk. That can have an impact on swelling. Interestingly, one study showed that exercise decreased a pressure pain issue. So, and that's one thing that we're noticing, for instance, with getting a blood pressure test. And that kind of pressure can give a lot of pain to someone with lipedema. And so exercise seems to have an impact on that tolerance for things that would give you pain. And then interesting also, there was studies on exercise and sleep apnea, and it had favorable impacts on sleep apnea that were not associated with weight loss. So also something else going on there that may favorably impact patients with lipedema. And then they talked about what are going to be the best exercises, what types of exercises should someone with lipedema be doing. And they said definitely postural and core exercises, exercising your core. And then muscle strengthening exercises, gait training, especially if you've, with that disproportion and maybe a lot of excess fat tissue on the lower body, it can really change your gait. So making sure that the joints all stay aligned and you have a good gait given that body shape. And then what's called neuromuscular re-education. So making sure your movements are healthy and smooth. Deep abdominal breathing, we know that facilitates lymphatic flow as well. Hydrotherapy or water therapy, aerobic exercise, and resistance exercise training. So these were all suggested in various research with lipedema that these are going to be good types of exercise. And so interesting, they made a statement in this paper. They said that people with lipedema don't respond to calorie restriction, and they don't respond to intense exercise the same way that the general population does. This means that when we do conservative care strategies, of which exercise is typically part of that conservative care, the exercise is not going to be curative, but it's going to help manage the symptoms for all the reasons we said before, that it could decrease inflammation and thus pain and all these help with lymphatic and venous flow and stuff like that. So it's going to be a part of the care, but it's not going to cure lipedema. So they said a customized exercise program should include strength training, flexibility exercises, and whole body conditioning. And it should be part of your conservative care. But very interesting is what they said, that aquatic exercise in particular seems to meet all the needs. And so when we're exercising in water, less pressure on our joints. And if you're having any joint pain, then that's going to facilitate you being able to exercise without further hurting your joints. It promotes lymphatic drainage. It contributes to calorie burning, which we won't go down that hole, but I'm not sure I believe that. And it relieves lower leg swelling, and for the reasons we talked about. It can contribute to weight loss or at least maintenance of weight, and it improves your ability to perform now functional tasks when you're on land, and definitely has psychological benefits as well. They talked about papers that referenced that it improves self-esteem, mood, and quality of life. So you definitely can do resistance stuff in the water, but you can also do, aerobic type things in the water. You can get more flexibility, because remember, that's also one of the key elements of exercise that we want, is that flexibility training. You can do that in the water. Matter of fact, you usually get more flexibility in the water than you can on land. So I thought it was very interesting that their conclusion was that a lot of exercise would be best to be water-based. Interesting. Their conclusions, even though lipedema is a condition that is characterized by resistance to diet and exercise, we know that both of these interventions can actually be pretty pivotal in conservative care. So we know that certain forms of diet are typically low calorie, low fat diet, not going to work for lipedema, but a carbohydrate restriction type of diet, it has been shown to be helpful. And what they're saying also is exercise too, and particularly if done in the water, is also going to be helpful. Of course, they recommend further research. We need larger sample sizes, a longer duration, and we need to learn more about how can we have a standardized approach to this is what we need for exercise and lipedema, but how can we take that standard template and then customize it, tailor it specifically to each person. This is what is going to work best for you. This is what is suggested. So people need that help and that guidance for stuff like that. So I thought that was a really interesting thing that just came out from Italy. Very interesting. A couple of things before we go today, and I'll see what messages we have over there, is I wanted to make sure that you were aware that this Saturday we have a free webinar that's coming up, and it's titled Ask Us Anything. So we're going to be this Saturday, September 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to be Catherine Seo, myself, Siobhan Huggins, Probably other people too. But we're going to be answering any of your questions about our wonderful event that's coming up on September 27, 28, 29, our virtual event. So come to this webinar to find out more about that. If you have any questions about what's going to be happening at that webinar, who's going to be speaking, what's the format going to be, how can you participate, come and join us for this webinar on September 21st. But that does lead me right into reminding you that we're just a little over a week away from our wonderful heart-to-heart virtual 3-day conference event that's coming up September 27, 28, 29. And the link down below to register and join us will be there, because I very much hope you will join us for both of these, the webinar this Saturday and for our 3-day event. It's going to be absolutely spectacular, some great speakers, and in a format that allows you to participate and join in the discussion as much as you want. So be sure and join that. I'm just looking over to see, hi, Tamara is here, and Cherry is here from Charleston, South Carolina, Nancy from Mount Pleasant, Michigan. I just love that name, Mount Pleasant. And Karen is here from Michigan. Hello to you. Truth Seeker, thank you. Come here if you're a truth seeker. Very good. So thank you all for being here and posting hi to me. And then also, I know that Linda, you asked me, of course, about those biomarkers, and I'll get you that paper. So email me, or if any other questions you have, email me, Leslyn@lipedemaproject.org. Let me know if you are having difficulty getting any of these papers, because I can get them to you, or if you have any other questions, and I'd be happy to respond to you. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I'll see you again in October for our research updates, the first and third Thursday. See you again then. So thanks for being here, and see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.